Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Center for Spiritual Living Victoria Online. My name is Carrie Hunter, and I'm the Senior Minister at the Center, and it's lovely to have you here with me today, whenever it is that you might happen to be watching this. So my topic for this week is 3 keys to higher awareness. And, I want to begin with a quote from Scripture. As ye believe, it is done unto you, or it is done unto you as ye believe, depending upon which version you might be reading. And of course, this basically is the fundamental premise in our teaching. Whatever it is that we believe, whatever it is that we are projecting out into the world, whatever the images that we have in our minds, what Ernest Holmes, our founder, called the mental equivalent, the picture that we see in our minds, the belief that we have behind it, that's basically what's happening for us in our lives. That's what we're creating with our lives, and that's the good news, and it's the bad news. Because if we see our future, if we see everything around us as being beautiful and loving and wonderful and exciting, then that's the kind of life that we're creating for ourselves. If, on the other hand, we're feeling down and out, if we're seeing the image of our lives as being just a progression of one bad thing after the other, then that is what we are creating as well, because it's our belief systems. It's the image of what we hold for ourselves that keeps on being created in our lives. What we focus upon expands. And so it's really important for us to be careful what we're focusing upon. And if we find that we're spending a lot of time thinking about how bad life is, or how terrible the world looks, how serious our circumstances are, I will never have the right home, or I will never own a home, I will never be in a relationship, I will never have a job that excites me or thrills me, then we won't. It's the other way around. And we don't just see the image in our minds. We see it already done. And we feel it. We feel that passion in our hearts. And so what we really need to consider is what we have been taught from the time that we were just little children. Were we taught that everything was possible? Or were we taught that life was just a challenge? Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could just sit back in a chair and relax and snap our fingers and say abracadabra, and that beautiful image that we hold is just done instantly? Well, when you're in a higher consciousness, it can almost happen that way. And I picked up a book this last week that I haven't looked at for a long, long time. It's a book about the life of, not really the life of Ernest Holmes, but about some of the wonderful things that happened to him as a result of spiritual mind treatment, prayer, as a result of his high consciousness. And it was written by William Hornaday, and it is called Your Aladdin's Lamp. And I love to dip into it because I always come up with something that Dr. Holmes did that we would call a miracle. But he didn't use the word miracle. It's nowhere in the textbook. It's nowhere to be found. To him, these things were just ordinary experiences. And it's so wonderful to think about them that way, that what we perceive to be miracles in our lives are everyday occurrences. They're perfectly normal when we are in a state of high consciousness. And so it was interesting to think about that. And when I was dipping into the book, what I discovered, I guess it was yesterday, a story about Dr. Holmes and Bill Hornaday. Bill Hornaday worked with him and had been his protege, and Dr. Holmes thought probably the most promising of all of the people that he'd ever worked with, because, again, Bill Hornaday had a very high consciousness, but not as high as Dr. Holmes. And Hornaday tells the story of a time coming when, this was in the early days of the church, the time coming when there was a $6,000 payment that was due to the bank, and there was not $6,000 in their bank account. And so he talked to Dr. Holmes about it, and Dr. Holmes said, it'll be fine, don't worry about it. And on that Sunday when he was speaking, Dr. Holmes he just mentioned in passing, we need $6,000 by the end of the month. And I'm knowing it's all happening. It's all coming to us. And that was it. That was all he said, went on with what he was talking about. And at the end of the service, people filed out, and there was a woman who stayed behind. And as Dr. Holmes approached her, and he knew her name, they chatted. And she said, you know, my husband has been ill, and you have done so much to help us that I'm going to write you a check for $6,000, and I will have it delivered to your office tomorrow. And Dr. Holmes thanked her. Was polite, thanked her, said that was wonderful, and that her consciousness certainly was in the right place. So the next day, the woman dropped off the check to the reception area, and it happened that Bill Hornaday picked it up and took it into Dr. Holmes. And Dr. Holmes was reading proofs for his next book at that point. And Bill Hornaday put down the check in front of him and said, look at this, here's the $6,000. And Bill was so excited, and Dr. Holmes said, are you interested in reading proofs, Bill? Do you like reading them? And so Bill looked at him, and he said, there's the $6,000. And Dr. Holmes said, yeah. And he said, I really don't like reading proofs. I wish I could do this better. It really bothers me. And Bill Hornaday was feeling quite upset that Dr. Holmes wasn't excited. And then he realized that when you absolutely know, beyond any doubt, that things are happening for you, there isn't that excitement around it. There's gratitude. And I mean, Dr. Holmes always said the greatest prayer that we can ever pray is thank you. So there's gratitude around it, but not surprise, because he knows it happens. And we all have our, the things that we know will absolutely happen. I was thinking back to childhood, and, as I mentioned, what do we learn in childhood? I never had anybody tell me that I couldn't do something, that I would never be able to. I mean, my parents were basically absent from my life. From the time I could toddle, is toddle a word? From the time I could walk and talk, which was very early, I don't recall them being around me very much. They just had their own demons to slay, so I was left on my own a lot. And I can remember going to my first birthday party. And not my birthday party, but that of another little girl. And we were introduced to the game of bingo, which I had never played before. And so I was handed a card. We were told how to play it, and I thought, I'm going to win. I just knew. I knew I was going to win. Well, I not only won the first game, I won the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, until finally the hostess came and took my card away from me. And I didn't know any better. I didn't know enough that after a couple of wins, I could have just given my card away. But I had this certainty within me that I would win. As long as I had a card in my hand and was playing the game, I would win. And when I got just a little bit older, my grandparents taught me to play cribbage. And it was the same thing. I knew that I would win, and I always won. And then, after they passed, I never played the game again. And a friend of mine was passing through at Christmas a few years ago and invited me to go to his friend's place, and have a visit. And so we were visiting, and they asked if I knew how to play cribbage, and I said, yeah, I do. I learned as a child. And they said, well, would you like to play a game or two? And I said, oh, sure. And they said, but I have to warn you, I always win. And they said, what? And I said, well, my grandparents taught me to play cribbage, and I just always win. And they said, well, when did you last play? And I said, oh, it's been a long, long time. And they said, well, probably they let you win. And I said, no. I said, I won fair and square. I know that I won. Anyway, they said, well, let's play. So we played, and of course I absolutely skunked them 3 games in a row. And they said, maybe we should just sit back and have some tea. And that's what we did. But it came from my childhood, this absolute certainty, this knowing. And it's the same thing as, when you have, you know that you're going to get the parking spot. You know that it's there for you, always. I think Dr. Holmes called it Doris Day parking, because Doris Day was part of the congregation, and she used to always say that she always found a parking spot. So I'm always saying, yeah, I've got Doris Day parking. Anyway, the other day, my daughter and my elder daughter and son-in-law were passing through town, and we agreed that we would meet in a coffee shop in Sydney because they just had an hour. They were going to catch the ferry to Salt Spring Island, where my daughter was doing a pottery workshop. And so as I was driving to the coffee shop, I thought, well, I know I have a parking spot, but I should probably work on manifesting one for them. And so I was thinking about that, and as I considered it, I could just see this perfect place across the street from the coffee shop. And I got there early, and I got a table, which is unusual these days, and I was sitting looking out the window at this strip, this empty strip, where they could come and park. And then I saw them walking toward the building, and they weren't parked in that area. And they came in, and I said, oh, you didn't park across the street? And they said, no, just around the corner was the perfect parking spot for us. And I laughed. You know, when you're praying for the perfect spot, when you're speaking your word for the perfect spot, you're not designating exactly where it is. You're not directing it. You just know it's a perfect spot for that person. And that's what they found. Now, we all have those kinds of experiences. And we say, well, yeah, well, that's easy. Finding the perfect parking spot, it's always there. That's easy stuff. Well, you know what? It can all be easy. It can all be the abracadabra. Because there is no big or small in the mind of God. And Dr. Holmes said, there's no difference between $100 and $1 million if you're praying to manifest something, because God doesn't know the difference. God doesn't say, oh, that's way too much. We can't possibly do that. This is our problem. We think that it's impossible because it seems too much. And so it's a matter of changing our thinking. We say that so often, change your thinking, change your life. But we have to banish doubt. Banishing doubt is the first step in gaining, or the first key in gaining higher consciousness, higher awareness in our lives. And I was thinking about the wonderful metaphysical writer Alan Cohen, who's an old and dear friend of mine. And Alan has written, last time I looked, he'd written 27 books. And he's not even that well known, but he has a huge following. And he operates his book sales out of his, he's now moved to the big island of Hawaii, but he lived on Maui for many years up in Hulu. And I used to have the good fortune of being able to look after his little dog Munchie when I was visiting Maui. And it was always a wonderful experience. Anyway, that's not what I'm meaning to talk about. I once was at a workshop that Alan was giving, and he had this wonderful exercise that I loved. And he said, think about 3 things that you'd like to do and write them down. He said, one of them is going to be really easy, and the second one is going to be a challenge, and the third one is going to be outrageous. And so he said, you've written them down, so you start on the first one. And I'm just going to make something up. Let's say that you haven't done any exercise during the pandemic, and you're still not, and you may start by walking a kilometer. Easy to do. You just get out and walk a kilometer. And once you've done that, cross it off the list. And then what was the challenge there becomes your easy. And what was outrageous becomes your challenge. And then you add another outrageous to the list. And so then you tackle the next thing on your list that is easy. And you keep on doing that until, it keeps changing. And pretty soon you're living in your outrageous life. You're creating wonderful things that you maybe never thought were possible. And I saw Alan work on this at a Silamar, the conference that I was attending, which it used to be held annually for our centers, and it was just the most spectacular event. About 1,200 people there. And we were in Merrill Hall at a Silamar, and so there were about 1,200 people there. And Alan asked if there was anybody in the crowd who had something that they wanted to manifest. And there was a woman who said that she wanted to buy a house. She knew the house. She knew what it would look like. It was on 3 acres of land. She needed it 3 acres so that she could have horses. And she was an artist, so she needed to have at least one room in the house where there was lots of light, so that she could paint year-round. And she went on to describe this house, and Alan said, the fact that you can describe it means that you already have planted that seed. And he said, now, have you done anything about buying it? And she said, well, I went to the bank, and the banker said no, because I didn't have sufficient income, and I didn't have a big enough down payment. And he said, well, did you try? She said, did you try another one? And she said, I went to 28 bankers, and they all said no. And then, or I'm sorry, he's telling the story of somebody else who went to 29 bankers, and finally the 29th banker said yes, and loaned her the money that she needed to buy the property that she was buying. And I won't go into that further. But he was saying to this woman who was at a Silomar in the audience, so, can you go to another banker? And she said, well, yeah, I can do that. He said, could you go to 10? And she said, well, I guess I could. And he said, could you go to 29? And she hesitated, and she said, yes, I could do that. And he said, 30? And she was getting the picture here, that you don't just give up if somebody says no, that there's always somebody there who will say yes. And as she said that, a man at the back of the room stood up, and he said, I am a mortgage broker, and I can do this deal for you. Come and see me at the end of this session. And everybody cheered and applauded. And there was another woman who got up and said that she really wanted a relationship, and that there was a man back home that she was very attracted to, but he hadn't ever asked her out. And so Alan said, so do you have his phone number? And she said, well, yes. And he said, are you prepared to go outside that door and call him and ask him for a date when you get home? And I mean, everybody was kind of revved up at this point. And she said, yeah, I could do that. She was very nervous, but she said, I could do that. And he said, okay, you go and do it. So she did. And when she came back into the room, he said, well, and she said, he said yes. And again, everybody applauded and cheered, but they cheered more the next year, because the next year she and her partner were there, and they were married on the grounds at a Silomar. This was the man that she called that day. So we have seen these kinds of things happen. The thing is, we get in our own way. It is our own doubts. And so we need to banish those doubts. And starting one small step at a time, if we can't go to 29 bankers, let's at least go to 1, 2, 3. Let's work our way up. Let's know, absolutely know, that the right one is there. I've just been so fortunate in my life. I've announced to the congregation the last couple of weeks that I'm needing to move, and I was looking for a place to live, and this is what my budget is. And everybody was saying to me, you'll never find a place, with that budget, not in the Victoria area. Everything's too expensive. And I just knew that I would, and I have. And it's so exciting to just know that this always works. Now, I have a deep belief that I win at bingo, that I win at cribbage, and that I can manifest a place to live. Do I have a deep belief in everything else in my life? I guess not. Or there would still be things in my life that I would like to manifest. But the thing is, I'm reminded that this really works when you really believe in yourself, and when you're really connected to that higher awareness, that higher consciousness. So step 1, banish the doubt. And step 2 is cultivating the witness. And I've talked about this before, and we've done meditation around it, where, when you start a meditation, you become aware of your breath. And, the breathing in, the breathing out, just aware of it, just kind of sinking into your breath. And then you witness your thoughts, because inevitably when we start to meditate, our minds start, there are thoughts that are running through. And you just let them go, as you know. You allow them to go. But the thing is, you're witnessing them as they pass by. And then, you observe your body. Is there any place inside you that is uncomfortable? Is there any place you need to relax? Is there anything that needs healing? You're observing. And this is called being the witness, because the you that is witnessing these things, observing these things, is not your physical self, is not your brain. It is your soul self or your spirit self. Think about it. Your thoughts are running through. You're looking at them. Who's the you? It's so much bigger than what we think it is. And so we need to acknowledge this, and we need to practice this. Practice thinking about who it is. And I once read an anecdote that Wayne Dyer talked about. And he had stubbed his big toe and broken it. And he loved to play tennis. And it was much too painful for him to play tennis. But he wanted to get out and play tennis. And he started thinking about it. And he started witnessing. He removed himself physically and went into his higher self. And was witnessing the pain in his toe. And thinking, oh, well, that's my physical self, but that's not who I am. And I mean, it may sound a little woo-woo, but in fact, this stuff really works. I remember my minister years ago saying to me, this stuff really works, Carrie. Well, it does really work. Anyway, Wayne Dyer remained the witness. And you will probably be able to relate to this if you think about a time that you maybe hurt your toe, and when it was really hurting, swollen, or you perhaps cut a finger and there's that throbbing that goes on with it. And then you perhaps watch a movie, or you read a book, or you're working on your computer, and you don't notice it. You don't feel anything. You don't think about it at all until you go to bed, until your mind is removed from the book, the movie, the work that you were doing, and you're lying there in bed, and all of a sudden you feel that painful force because you're back, you're in your body again, you're observing your body, you're witnessing it, but you're not thinking about the fact that it is not who you are. We all do that. So anyway, Wayne Dyer made himself the witness of his toe, knowing that that wasn't his true self, that his true self is that he was spirit having a human experience. And he was able to go back and play tennis the next few days, and in a few days, that toe perfectly healed. And I've told the story of Ernest Holmes, how his pinky finger was caught in an electric window in a car and crushed. And instead of being rushed to the hospital as the driver wanted to do, he said no. He said, just let me sit with it. For 10 minutes he sat with it. And when he took his hand away, the finger was completely healed. This is the stuff we call miracles, which Dr. Holmes says is perfectly normal. And it is perfectly normal when we reach that higher state of consciousness, that higher awareness in our lives. And so, first of all, we banish the doubt. Next, we become the witness. We cultivate being a witness. And then the third thing is going into the silence. For most of us, that's the most challenging thing to do, although each of them can be in their own way. Going into the silence. How many times have you started to meditate and your mind is so busy, monkey mind's just going on, and you just think, oh, there's no way I can get into the silence. So if you can think of your mind as a beautiful pond, and when you look at a pond, if there's a breeze, there are ripples in the pond. If there's a wind blowing, then things blow into the pond on the surface. If it's autumn, the leaves are falling into the pond, and so on. And the thing is that there's busy stuff going on top of the pond. And imagine yourself just dropping a pebble in, and the pebble goes down a little bit. And that takes you to a place of analysis, if we were using psychological terms. And so you start analyzing what is going on at the surface, what those thoughts are, where they're coming from. But then as the pebble goes down a little bit deeper, instead of analyzing, you experience something called synthesis, where you kind of become one with everything. You just accept whatever is. And then the final drop down of the pebble down to the bottom of the pond, where there is perfect stillness, where there is perfect silence. And that's when we're really one with the divine, one with God. So if you think of that metaphor, and if you imagine this pebble going down deeper and deeper and deeper until you reach the point where you are one with the divine. It is such a significant place to be. And being in the silence, it's not about just turning off the radio, the television, the cell phone, or whatever, removing yourself from noisy crowds. It's about an inner stillness. It's an inner stillness that we can find anywhere under any circumstances, but it begins with turning off all of the noise around us. And when we practice it, and it needs practice, you know, if I want to play the piano, I'm not going to learn to play it overnight. I'm not going to sit down and play a concerto the next day. It takes practice to learn how to play that piano. Same thing at the gym. You know, it takes practice to build the muscle to do certain things. Well, we're building our spiritual muscle, and so it's important to look at it as practice. I call it spiritual practice every day. You know, I do my spiritual practice first thing in the morning, and then right now, Reverend Jennifer and I are teaching a practitioner class, and we meet with our practitioners every morning at 10 o'clock and meditate and pray with them. And it is so deep and so beautiful. And the energy expands. And we're seeing wonderful things happen for people that we're praying for. You know, again, people, some may call them miracles, but they're just everyday occurrences. And that collective energy is so much greater than just the energy of one. So if you get the opportunity to meditate and pray with others, do so. You know, set up your own group, you know, or come to the center and find a prayer partner. We should all have prayer partners. Make such a difference in our lives. And when we do that, you know, when we think of our minds like a pond and then get to that place where we're resting in the divine, that's when we really start seeing everything in our lives starting to work. And so the three keys to higher awareness are: first, banish the doubt; second, become the witness; and third, go into the silence. The silence has many answers. And when we do that, that's when we really get to know God. We don't just get to know about God. We get to know God at a deep and personal level. And that's when all things become possible. And so it is. Thanks so much for being here today. Lovely to have you on the other side of my screen. And if you'd like to drop in person someday, we are at 380 Cook Street in Victoria. It's the Cook Street Village Activity Center, which some mistake for a healing center, you know, for something other than it is. But look for our sign that we put out on Sundays, because we just rent the space on Sundays. We have meditation at 10:30, and at 11 o'clock our celebration service begins. We would love to have you with us and to share conversation and tea and coffee afterward. And it's just a wonderful place to meet with people of like mind and consciousness. Nothing to be afraid of. We're a friendly group. We don't bite. And we just love meeting new people. So thanks again for being here. If you'd care to make a donation to us, we would certainly welcome it. You can do that by going online to cslvictoria.org. And there's a button there that says donate, and it will take you through to PayPal and or your credit card or debit card, and you can just fill in your information there. Or you can send an e-transfer to donate@cslvictoria.org, and that goes directly into our bank account. And our treasurer will record your name and the amount that you've given in any case, no matter how you give it. And you will receive a tax receipt for that at the end of the year. So know that as you do that, you are helping us to rebuild our center after the pandemic and building it into something strong and vital and energetic, where people come together and absolutely love what they're doing. And we would love to welcome you there. And, you know, I was just thinking, like Dr. Holmes said, we need $6,000 to his group. And I didn't think to say that. I'm recording this on Sunday afternoon. I didn't think to say anything other than that this morning. But since the pandemic, we have been, our bottom line has, we're in the red, let me put it that way. by about $1,000 a month. And we've been fortunate to have a reserve that where we've been able to be covering that, but not forever. And so, you know, we need an extra $1,000 a month. So let us hold that in consciousness and know that, that people are coming along and supporting us in every way so that we can continue to grow and thrive and prosper and be a beacon of light in our community and be a magnet that attracts people of like-minded heart to our center. And that could be you. Thanks again for being here, and I hope to see you in person one of these days. And until then, blessings on your life. Bless you for being here, and have a wonderful week ahead. And so it is.